Overlord Volume 9 Chapter 2. Preparations for the Battle. Translated by Nigel. Edited, proofread by Deus Ex Machina. Part 1. 1 month later, the meeting was convened within the Valencia Palace of the Riesti's kingdom. Gazef Stronov had been standing motionless beside King Ranposa III, who was seated on his throne. He surveyed the serried ranks of nobles before him, and his eyes widened slightly as he picked out the forms of the 6 great nobles among them. The 6 of them gathered together was a rare occurrence indeed. The heads of these 6 families controlled almost as much land as the king, and between them their military power surpassed that of the king himself. Because of this, they frequently found reasons to excuse themselves from the king's summons. This was especially true for the leader of the anti-royalty faction, the noble faction, Marquis Bolorobe, who did not even bother to hide his disdain for the king. It was bad enough that for a while, people thought the kingdom might fall apart from within. Next, Gazef's eyes went to the king's 3 children. The most eye-catching of them all was the king's 3rd daughter, the Golden Princess, Rena their Chardellon Royal Viself. After that was his 2nd son, the 2nd prince, Zanik Valerian Agana Royal Viself. During the demonic disturbance, he had earned much praise when he had followed the king in deploying for the sake of the people. Last was the eldest son, the 1st prince Barbaro Andrianil Royal Viself. He had a strong body and a neatly trimmed haircut, and he was the man whom Marquis Bolorobe was trying to place on the throne. Presumably, Bolorobe was in attendance for this court session at Barbaro's own request. Any meeting attended by Marquis Bolorobe of the noble faction was sure to be an intense one. Gazef averted his eyes from the heavy atmosphere, which seemed to loom overhead like gathering storm clouds, and looked at the rest of the nobles. Of the 3 men present, who belonged to the royal faction, the first to catch Gazef's eye was Marquis Bromarush, the most luxuriously dressed person in the court. This nobleman with handsome features was approaching his 40s. His domain contained gold and mithril mines, whose bounty of precious metals made him the wealthiest man in the kingdom. However, dark whispers circulated that he was extremely greedy, to the point where he would even betray his own family for a gold coin. There were also rumors that he had betrayed the kingdom and was selling information to the empire. However, because of a lack of concrete evidence, nothing could be done about him. After all, beheading Marquis Bromarush, a prominent supporter of the royal faction without any proof, would cause all the nobles who followed him to switch to the anti-royal faction. If he was aware of this fact and took advantage of it to keep selling off information, then he would truly be the most despicable person present. Next, Gazef's eyes turned to the youngest and most handsome of the great nobles, Marquis Pespeya. He was married to the king's eldest daughter, and became the head of his household at the same time as his marriage. Although little was known about his abilities and personality, his father possessed an excellent personality and was a competent man, so Gazef felt that the young Pespeya might take after his sire. In contrast, the eldest among the 6 nobles was Margrave Uravana. His hair was white, and so little of it remained that there might as well have not been any at all. Though his body and limbs looked like gnarled wood, he still retained the gravitas expected of an elder. Uravana was the most persuasive of the great nobles. Arrayed against him were the 3 members of the noble faction. First was the core of the noble faction, Marquis Bolorobe, who controlled the most territory among the great nobles. His face was heavily scarred, a lord who looked like a warrior. As he was already in his 50s, his once stout body, which had been perfected through unrelenting trying, was little more than a memory of the past. But his voice and predator's gaze made people think that there must have been more than a little bit of his warrior self left in him. Although he as a warrior had lost much of his strength to age, as a commander, he was a better commander than even Gazef, which made him just as indispensable to the kingdom as the warrior captain. Beside him was Count Ritten. He was a man whose appearance called to mind the image of a fox, and also one of the lower-ranked members of the Six. As such, he resorted to ways and means to raise his status. However, his personality of not caring about others' suffering if it meant he could expand his power was not well received by other nobles. Allying himself to Marquis Overlord must have been a strategic move to escape his enemies. The final man of the noble faction had slicked-back blonde hair and narrow blue eyes. His face was pale and unhealthy-looking, with little sign that it had seen much sunlight. He was tall and skinny. Combined with his sallow complexion, he gave off the impression of a snake. He was not yet 40, but looked older because of his unhealthy pallor. With mixed emotions churning in his heart, Gazef looked away from him, from Marquis Raven. The impending succession of the next monarch had only intensified the power struggles. Marquis Overlord and Count Ritten of the noble faction, as well as Margrave Uravana of the royal faction, all backed first Prince Barbaro, while most of the unaffiliated nobles supported Marquis Pespeir, who had married the first princess. Raven was on the side of second Prince Zanuck, while Marquis Brahmarush did not seem to be concerned with matters of succession. For all these reasons, the king sat on his throne without making a fuss. If he pointed a finger at anyone, there was a danger of civil war breaking out. Until recently, Gazef had no opinion on who should become the next king. But now, his heart was leaning towards Zanuck. Either that, or Princess Rena as a dark horse, but the kingdom, in all its long history, had never been ruled by a queen, so that was probably out of the question. Now then, let us begin. The king's tone seemed slightly different than usual. Those with sensitive ears might have guessed the reason for today's gathering and showed it with curious suspicion. Read out the proclamation delivered by the imperial emissary. In accordance with the king's orders, the vassals flanking him on both sides began reading the contents of the parchment. The contents were roughly as followed. The Baharuth Empire acknowledges the sovereignty of the independent Kingdom of Nazarick, ruled by the great magic caster known as the Sorcerer King Ainzulgaun, and formally recognizes it as an ally of the Empire. Originally, the region near Irantal was the domain of the Sorcerer King Ainzulgaun. The Kingdom of Riestis is unlawfully occupying this territory and must now return it to its rightful owner. If the kingdom does not comply with this demand, the Empire will aid the Sorcerer King Ainzulgaun in an invasion to reclaim the Sorcerer King's territory. This will be a just war, fought to end unjust occupation. After the contents were read out, the room exploded into a hubbub of discussion. These terms were insane, and so was anyone who agreed to them. Just in case, I have also had the scholars examine the kingdom's history, and no mention of any individual named Ainzulgaun ruling the surroundings of Irantal was discovered. There is no legitimacy to this claim. In other words, this isn't even a proper demand, it's a madman's ravings. The boisterous cry rang throughout the hall. Marquis Overlord's formidable presence, a testament to his former glory as a warrior, seemed to give the other nobles courage, and they returned his shout with their own approval. Although it's been delayed, isn't this just the same old imperial invasion they announce every year? They always find some stupid reason to declare war, so this time round, they must really be scraping the bottom of the barrel to throw up this magic caster's name, right? I want to see what kind of clown they've given that ridiculous title of Sorcerer King. Count Ritten's words were followed by the derisive laughter of the mass nobles. However, the Count turned his fox-like eyes filled with disdain toward Gazef. I believe we've heard of this Saucer King madman before, haven't we, oh warrior Captain Stronov? Indeed, he was the magic caster who lent me a helping hand at the outskirts of Erantal. Count Ritten laughed mockingly before replying. I see, he must have helped because he thought they were his own peasants. The scornful laughter of the nobles could be heard all around, yet nobody stopped it, because Gazef, who was born a commoner, was hated by many members of the noble faction. If it had been a member of the royal faction, the king would have intervened, but since Count Ritten belonged to the opposition, the king could only furrow his brow. Seems like it was the Empire who burnt down the farming villages near Erantal, don't you think? The warrior Captain Dono seems to think it was the work of the slain theocracy. The person who rescued them was Kugane, right? Isn't that magic caster involved with the Empire? I believe someone previously said that magic caster was a spy trying to infiltrate us. And you couldn't find any trace of the bodies of the people who nearly killed you, did you, warrior Captain Dono? In his mind, Gazef recalled the sight of the powerful members of the Six Scriptures, as well as the mighty form of Ainzul. Although the bodies vanished as Count Ritten said, I do not feel the Empire was involved. When I was at Kani village, the knights that attacked us were far stronger than those of the Empire. They used angels, and there's no doubt that they were a unit from the slain theocracy. And why would the theocracy do that? How should I know? Indeed, if Gazef could give an answer like that, it would make him feel a lot better. Just as the court was about to fall into squabbling due to Gazef's silence, a voice of aid rang out from Ritten's side. That mad magic caster is irrelevant. What we need to decide on is how to respond to the false emperor, isn't that so, your majesty? It is as Marquis Bolorob says. We need to decide what the kingdom's answer will be. I beg your permission to speak, Marquis Pespeya said as he advanced. Accepting the emperor's terms will be very difficult. Our only recourse is war. The mention of war sparked activity amongst the serried ranks of the nobility. Oh, now is the time to crush them once and for all, and then take the fight to the Empire's doorstep. You're absolutely right. I'm tired of the constant imperial invasions. It's time to let the fools in the Empire know how fearsome we can be. Exactly, just as the Marquis says. These words, sandwiched by scattered laughter and repeated throughout the throng of nobles, grated unbearably on Gazef's ears. The last few years, they had regularly met the Empire on the field of battle at Katsa Plains. For the most part, they had simply drawn up battle lines and confronted each other, or skirmished briefly with minor losses to the kingdom. This year would probably be more of the same, and the nobles took on an air of laxity as they imagined the same old events playing out again. However, Gazef spoke out, spurred by the cry of his warrior's instincts. Don't think that this battle will end in a small skirmish like it always has. The nobles looked like they had been splashed with a basin of cold water, and turned reproachful looks on him. I see. This is what our warrior captain actually believes. Can you give us a reason for that? Yes, your majesty, that is. The image of a certain person set alarm bells ringing through his heart. That is to say, it is because of that magic caster, Ainzul. That being the case, the only one of us who has actually seen him face to face would be you, warrior captain. That means we must give some weight to your words. Can you tell us what makes you say that? Gazef was a loss for words. He could not give a good answer. He did not know how to explain it, but his warrior's instinct was telling him that making a poor decision about this war would be extremely dangerous. My king, could you not hand over the outskirts of Erantal to the Empire? No, to that magic caster. After a moment's silence, angry shouts flew through the air. You craven coward! How shameless can you get, you chicken heart? Those shouts came from the nobles of the royal faction. After His Majesty showed you such kindness, you turn around and tell him to surrender his domain to outsiders. When did you start serving the false emperor? Not to mention, you haven't even answered His Majesty's question. In the face of such deserved castigation, Gazef could not answer. Had he been in their position, he would probably have done the same thing. Enough. It was Gazef's king who reached a helping hand out to him in his hour of need. But, Your Majesty, I am deeply grateful, but my subjects would be so moved on my behalf. It is because of that reason that I ask you to remember that my warrior captain would never betray me. He has fearlessly thrust himself into danger countless times for me. Someone like that would never do anything which would harm me. The nobles who had shouted at Gazef bowed to the king. While he acknowledged this fact, he continued speaking to Gazef. Warrior captain, whom I trust like my right hand. Even if you are the one who puts forth that proposal, I cannot agree to it. Giving up one's domain without a fight is not befitting of a ruler. Such an act cannot be allowed for the sake of those who live upon it. It would ruin their peaceful lives. Handing land over while moving all the residents off without harming them was nothing more than a fairy tale. Even if it was possible, there would be no way to allow the displaced residents to live like they used to, and in the end their lives would be worse off for it. That is undoubtedly so, Your Majesty, and I hope you will forgive me for my foolish words. Gazef lowered his head as his king, who loved the people so dearly, spoke to him. If he was a foolish noble, a landlord who simply saw his people as a means of making money, the king would not have said what he did. It was because of the king's compassion that Gazef was willing to pledge his life to him. He recalled the words he spoke to his vice-captain half a year ago. When you seek help, the ones who will come are the nobles. The strong will bring aid. Those are the ones who will come to the aid of the weak, regardless of the danger. The Gazef from before he had entered the Grand Marshal tournament would never have said such things. Much like his vice-captain, he would have thought that there were no nobles who would risk themselves for the commoners. After he began serving the king, however, Gazef realized for the first time that such nobles existed. Regretfully, said nobles lacked power. There had been many lives that he could not save, and just as many incidents where the noble's pointless pride had led him to throw obstacles in his way. Even so, the man he served had not given up. He had continued working toward building a kingdom where its people would be able to live better lives day by day. Gazef was proud of his king, Ranposa III. If that was not the case, he would have defected to the empire when the emperor himself, Jekniv, had tried to win him over on the battlefield. But it was precisely because he was such a man that dark clouds loomed heavy over his heart. What the king spoke was the truth, and he had the right view of things. The king had always been full of compassion, but Gazef knew the reason why the king had taken such a harsh tone. After the demonic disturbance, the balance of power between the two factions had shifted greatly. For a long time, the kingdom had been divided into two factions that had been largely even until recently, but now the royal faction had expanded, while the noble faction had shrunk. Because the king had boldly ridden forth and driven Jaldari back, he was seen by the people as a strong ruler, and a fair number of nobles had thrown their support behind the king. Thus, the king could not afford to show weakness here. However, saying that would mean, still, the warrior captain has a point. No. We can avoid a war by handing over a single city. A king also has a duty to prevent undue suffering to his people. Would not a true king be willing to rend his own body for the sake of the people? The one who spoke was from the noble faction. The words were pretty, but they were calculated to reduce the amount of land controlled by the king, and as such, the royal faction instantly rebutted them. That land is the domain of the king. If you would give up land to the enemy, why not surrender yours first? The reply came just as swiftly. What nonsense is that? The Empire asked for Irantal and its surroundings. Do you really believe they'd accept my land from the other side of the kingdom? Why don't you think before you speak? The royal faction had grown stronger, while the noble faction had gotten weaker. That simply made the noble faction even more desperate to hamstring the king. The upset balance between the two factions was the source of Gazef's unease. Once the balance between factions crumbled, the noble faction's efforts to weaken the king would only intensify. That might lead to the kingdom splitting down the middle in the near future. That being the case, the king would have to show off his strength to quell any attempts at revolt from the potential rebels. However, was the inability to admit weakness not a dangerous thing in itself? Lost in his thoughts, Gazef only snapped back to reality after several hard stares from members of the royal faction. They must have thought he had secretly gone over to the noble faction because he had suggested handing over the kingdom's territory. At the same time, they were looks of reproach for Gazef, for being an up-jumped peasant who had forgotten the king's largesse. HMPH. Then, why don't you ask the king to exchange of your lands with the region around Irantal, and then hand it over? As though land could be so easily traded. You fools. You are the fools here. The flames of this childish squabbling engulfed the entire meeting hall. In the past, disputes like this would have ended in a stalemate due to the even balance of power, but now the voices of the royal faction were louder than those of the noble faction. Normally, the king would have stopped this. He did not seem inclined to do so now, probably because the royals had the advantage. Just about any human being would find it hard to put an end to circumstances which favored themselves. The king must also have wanted to vent his frustrations with the noble faction. It's like he's drunk a sweet poison. Slowly, Gazef began to feel a cold, black conviction in the eyes of the noble faction. A chill flowed down his spine. The attack of the archdemon, Daldry, had been the cause of everything. At that time, the king's decision to lead his men into battle was arguably the best one. Without his help, the battle lines might have broken and the adventurers would have been overrun. If Blue Rose had gone down with them, the kingdom would have been in a great predicament. However, as Gazef looked at the scene unfolding in front of him, he could not help but wonder if they should have done something else instead. What would this court session have been like if the standings of both factions had been even? I don't know, but... that's right. What if we lost this war with the Empire? Would we continue resisting to the end? Would we not? The royal faction would lose a great deal of its strength instantly, while that of the noble faction would go up. Would we return to the days when both sides were evenly matched after such a great realignment? Or would the balance of power crumble completely and plunge the country into civil war? Would that be all right? He disliked this feeling, the feeling that despite making his own choices, he was ultimately still dancing to the tune of someone else. Could it be that all this had been planned from the moment I met Gandono? No, I don't want to think that might be the case. We only spoke to each other briefly, but he didn't feel like such a person to me. From the way Gazef addressed him with honorifics even in his speech, and his thoughts, it was clear that he bore no ill will toward the magic caster Ainzu Gaon, even though he was now an enemy. Maybe he could peacefully take control of... no, if I continue thinking like this it'll be treason. I think it's about time we stopped this petty squabbling. A deep male voice cut through the commotion. Everyone fell silent as they tried to find its source. Gazef bit his lip as someone else usurped the role the king was supposed to play. That victory was like sweet honey. He did not think it was a big deal. However, would the king forget himself in that sweetness? Would the king that Gazef was so proud of disappear? He could not erase such thoughts from his mind. Your Majesty, if the Empire's invasion is a foregone conclusion, then we must prepare ourselves. Marquis Raven, it is His Majesty alone. Marquis Raven interrupted those words from the noble faction. A moment, please. If His Majesty's troops are defeated, who knows where the Empire will attack next? Therefore, I will cooperate fully with His Majesty for the sake of protecting my domain. Silence fell. The kingdom's troops were conscripted civilians. There was no way they were a match for the professional troops of the Empire's knights. The only way to defeat the Empire's advantage in troop quality was with overwhelming numbers. That had been the way things had gone the past few years. If they could not even muster up sufficient troops to match the Empire's, then the outcome of the war was already a foregone conclusion. After hearing Raven's words, the members of the noble faction imagined the Imperial Knights ravaging their lands as well. The first to announce their support for the king were the nobles who held land between the capital and the Rental, followed by the nobles who held close ties to the first group, and in the end, all the nobles pledged their support. All right. Then, we shall delay our reply to the Empire, and gather our troops at the usual place before we declare war. Naturally, I will be going as well. Please let me join you on the battlefield, Father. The one shouting was Prince Barbaro, who had been waiting silently at the side until now. No, no. There's no need to trouble you, as the first in line to succeed the throne, to take the field. I will go this time, Aniue. First Prince Barbaro turned to the person who had spoken from beside him, the second Prince Zanuck. Barbaro's answer was short and to the point. No need. His retort was filled with hostility. Zanuck's proposal was a reasonable one. Since the king was already headed to the battlefield, it would be far too dangerous to bring his eldest son along with him. Barbaro understood this, but even so, his refusal came from his hatred of Zanuck. That too had stemmed from the demonic disturbance. During the demonic disturbance, Zanuck had patrolled the capital and earned the praise of many citizens. Barbaro, on the other hand, hid inside the palace. As a result, the number of nobles supporting Zanuck had sharply increased as well. At a glance, Zanuck did not look particularly heroic, and the contrast between his looks and his brave deeds made him stand out. Conversely, Barbaro looked impressive, but his inaction made him appear cowardly. In order to erase this shame, Barbaro wanted to go to the battlefield to show his martial valor. The first prince, Barbaro, was a reasonably talented warrior, in keeping with his appearance. That said, he had still led a sheltered lifestyle, and he was not strong enough to beat someone like Princess Rena's bodyguard Climb, who had trained himself until he had thrown up blood. Even so, he could still be said to be the strongest fighter of the royal family. Someone like him could not endure losing to Zanuck, whose weight meant that he could barely keep his balance after swinging a sword once. Although Marquis Raven had once said, "What good is a king's swordplay?" Barbaro knew that he was Zanuck's intellectual inferior, and as such, he was even more determined not to lose out in his chosen specialty. No matter what, one could not keep trailing behind one's opponent in the Game of Thrones. Gazef's gut ached as he considered the potential crises hiding within the kingdom. Although he wanted to resign his commission after the king abdicated and dedicate himself to protecting Ranposa III, realistically speaking, it would probably be very difficult to do that. In addition, he would probably not qualify as a loyal subject if he did not work as the warrior captain to save lives which could be saved. The king might not even allow him to do so in the first place. If there was someone on his level who could replace him as warrior captain, then he would gladly hand his position over. However, he could not think of any such people. There was one person who was as strong as Gazef, but that person would never agree to become the warrior captain in his place. What's Brain planning to do in the future? Does he have something in mind? Although Brain had become Princess Rena's direct subordinate, Gazef had a feeling that he would leave soon. If he did vanish, it would probably be to hone his sword skills. As a man bound to the courts, Gazef could not help but admire that lifestyle. He recalled Brain's polished swordsmanship. After the demonic disturbance, Gazef and Brain had exchanged blows in a friendly spar. Although Gazef had triumphed in that serious match, he could feel the hours Brain had put into his sword work as the wind of his sword's passage blew through his hair. For all he knew, Brain might end up becoming stronger than himself in a few years' time. If Brain agreed to take my place as the next warrior captain, I'd focus my energy into training the next generation, so the kingdom would have its share of skilled warriors in the future. I certainly agree. Marquis Borobi's voice interrupted Gazef's thoughts. Now was not the time to worry about the distant future. If you will permit me, I would gladly contribute my strongest troops to the effort and to the protection of His Majesty's person. How about that, Your Majesty? Umu, warrior captain, what do you think? He could not pretend that he had not heard it. That would be a lie. Gazef put on a show of earnest consideration, while ignoring the twitch of Raven's eyebrow. The suggestion for Barbaro to fight at the front had probably come from Bolorobe, who supported Barbaro for the next king. However, Gazef had no proof of this, so there was only one answer he could give. I believe it all depends on His Majesty's opinion. The king nodded deeply, and Gazef suddenly felt a pang of guilt. Is that so? Well, if that's the case, then you shall come along as well. Yes. Allow me to present the false emperor's head to you, father. As he listened to Barbaro's enthusiastic reply, Gazef could only hope that the impending preparations would blow away the clouds of unease forming over his heart. Marquis Raven's political ability was second to none among the 6 great nobles, so one would expect that the office where he showed his abilities would be an impressive one. Yet, this was not the case. Many would be surprised if they knew the exact number of decisions which affected the future of the kingdom that had been drafted in such a humble, cramped place. The room's interior was filled with bookshelves, and the books and labeled scrolls were neatly arranged in a way that hinted at their owner's personality. However, it was not because of these things that the room was so small, although they were part of the reason for it. The greatest reason could not be seen by the naked eye. Raven's manor home was built of bricks coated in stucco. This was customary when it came to the construction of a noble home, and Raven's office was no exception. However, the interior of those walls were coated with copper sheets that enveloped the entire room. This was done to interfere with spells used to eavesdrop, observe or detect his location. The windowless room felt a little claustrophobic, but from a cost-effectiveness point of view, it was practical and had to be endured. Upon returning from Valencia Palace, Raven had made a beeline for this office, which was proof against magic. He crossed to the other side of his sturdy working desk before flopping down onto his chair, in a way that suggested that he had completely run out of energy. Then, he covered his face with his hands. Anyone who saw him would not think of a great noble who commanded unrivaled power and privilege in the kingdom. Only a middle-aged man who had been worn down by the weight of stress and responsibility. He brought up the limp strands of his blonde hair in his fingers, combing them back up and leaning back in his seat as his face twisted. Perhaps it was because he was relaxed now, but the stress accumulated during the court session turned to anger, which filled his heart. Within moments, it had surpassed his ability to contain and exploded into the air with a mighty shout. Idiots, each and every one of them. Nobody understood what was going on. No, if someone had understood and was taking advantage of the situation, they would be masterful schemers indeed. Right now, the kingdom was in great peril. The empire's frequent saber-rattling led to severe problems such as food shortages, and then there were other issues that were starting to precipitate. The only reason why no cracks in the kingdom had appeared so far was because the nobles honestly believed, "We just need to hold on a bit longer until the other faction collapses first." The empire employed professional warriors known as knights, but the kingdom had no equivalent soldiers among their ranks. To resist the imperial invasions, they need to conscript peasants in their levies. The result of that was villages everywhere running short of manpower for a period of time. The empire had a firm grasp of the kingdom's practice of conscription, and thus they declared war during the harvest season. During the busiest season of a farming village, the impact of their adult males, the most important source of labor, going missing for 1 month could not be overstated. Of course, the idea of simply not conscripting as many people had come to mind. But in the face of the empire's military, who were far better trained and armed, the kingdom could not muster any resistance without the weight of numbers on their side. There had been one occasion when a lack of conscripts had resulted in tremendous casualties for the kingdom. Fortunately, the counterattack led by Gazef had succeeded, killing 2 of the original 4 knights, and putting an end to the war, since both sides had won and lost. However, the truth was that the kingdom had been weakened, and in light of the many citizens lost, the kingdom had come out on the losing side of the equation. And even during these circumstances, that traitorous filth, this foolish power struggle, those idiots, fighting over a stupid seat. Marquis Bromarash, one of the 6 great nobles, had betrayed the kingdom by selling its information to the empire. The nobles had split into 2 factions and were struggling for dominance. Both princes were eyeing the succession like dogs feuding over a bone. Marquis Raven pounded on his desk repeatedly, venting his anger. The king's no better either. He's no fool and he's not drunk on power, but he isn't thinking at all. If he doesn't give up his seat soon, it'll only make the succession crisis worse. Princess Rena gave him a good opportunity by making things favorable for the royal faction, so he should hurry up and transfer power to the next generation already. During the demonic disturbance, the one who had encouraged the king to take the field personally was Princess Rena. Because of that, the royal faction's influence had increased greatly, and they should have been able to put Prince Zanuck on the throne if they had advocated it then and there. However, things ended up like this because he pitied his first son. It's not like I don't understand his feelings, but nobody's thinking about what's important. Nobody at all. Strictly speaking, this was not true. Unfortunately, most of them were in Raven's camp. He should not have concentrated them all under his wing. Instead, he should have carefully disseminated them throughout the other factions and had him influence the leaders from the inside. However, his irritation was not aimed at himself for not doing this earlier, but at the members of the other factions, whose brainlessness was giving him headaches. Idiots, each and every one of them. Raven shouted in frustration as he thought of these goblin-brained simpletons who could only see the bait in front of them. Even so, what should I do? Think, Raven, think. Raven's frustration grew as his breathing calmed. He had to think of how to keep the kingdom going, even in the face of the dangers ahead. To begin with, this war with the Empire is dangerous, especially if that Ainzul Gaon commands great power. I should start by assuming he can cause over 10,000 casualties by himself before I begin strategic planning. Then at the same time, I'll push for the prince to be the next king. Will that be too difficult? Raven spoke the words on his mind out loud while he organized his thoughts. Honestly, he wanted to share this matter with someone and discuss it with them. That was why Raven supported Prince Zanuck. The second prince was his only ally, though there was now another person, Princess Rena, amongst the royals. Both of them understood the danger which the kingdom faced, and he considered her a comrade in arms when it came to planning for the future. If only he could ascend to the throne, it would take a weight off his right shoulder. I don't think he was joking when he promised to make me the Prime Minister. Though I can't relieve the burden on my left shoulder, at the very least it would improve the kingdom's condition. Raven's current objective was to place Prince Zanuck on the throne. If he failed in that, the country would take another step toward ruin. With Princess Rena's help, my job would be easier, at least. Raven sighed heavily as he gave voice to his thoughts and future plans. Even he had days when he wanted to just put everything down and walk away. Sometimes, the excessive worrying had even made him contemplate destroying the kingdom with his own hands, although that particular thought had only come up once or twice. It was like he was trying to build a sandcastle, surrounded by little brats trying to kick it down. At times, he felt like destroying the sandcastle himself, just to deny them the satisfaction. Still, he had a reason for ignoring those destructive impulses and carrying on like he did. There was a knocking on the door. The sound seemed to come from a lower position than usual. For a moment, Raven displayed an expression that was unlike his normal self. Perhaps you could say his expression melted. His eyebrows were drooping, and even the corner of his mouth was uncharacteristically relaxed. Oh, that's not good. I can't make a face like this. Raven lightly smacked his face, since his willpower was insufficient to restore the proper dignity to it. After tidying up his wild hair, he turned to the metal door and spoke so the person on the other side could hear. Though his voice was loud, it contained a surprising gentleness that indicated that he was not angry. Come in. The speed with which the heavy door opened indicated how much the other party had been looking forward to it. On the other side of the door was a boy. The boy's innocent, adorable face was colored with a slight blush on the pale skin of his cheeks. He looked to be around 5 years old, and he padded across the floor, stopping at Raven's knee. Now, you know you shouldn't be running indoors, it's hardly refined. A female voice followed the boy over to Raven. She was a woman with a pretty face that was shadowed by gloominess. She did not seem like a happy woman. Her clothes were of exquisite make, but their colors were muted. The woman bowed primly to Raven, and then she smiled. With a hint of embarrassment, Raven returned the smile. When had his wife started smiling? Suddenly, the memories of those days came unbidden to Marquis Raven. When Marquis Raven had been a younger man, his heart brimmed with the ambition and drive that was the hallmark of youth. And the target of his ambition was the throne. Aspiring to the throne was a treasonous dream. The young Marquis Raven, filled with confidence in his abilities, probably felt that he had no other goal that was worthy of being his lifelong objective. Toward that end, he had worked quietly, expanded his influence, accumulated wealth, expanded his connections, crushed his political enemies. Taking a wife was nothing more than a part of his plan. As long as he could sell off the position of Marchioness at a high price, he did not care what kind of woman he ended up with. As it turned out, she was a beautiful, yet gloomy woman, but Raven did not mind. After all, the important thing was the connections he made with his wife's family. Their home life was ordinary. No, that was just how Raven felt it was. He cared for the woman he married as a tool, but there was no love between them. As fate would have it, it was a tiny thing indeed that changed Raven. He turned his eyes to the boy in front of him. The first thing he thought when he learned he had a son was that he had another tool to use. However, as the newborn boy clutched his finger with his tiny hands, something broke inside Marquis Raven. This was his soft, squishy son, who seemed as much a monkey as a human being. He certainly did not think that he was adorable. Yet, when he felt the warmth that radiated from his finger, everything else suddenly seemed silly. The throne felt like garbage to him. The man driven by ambition had passed away at some point. Then, when Raven smiled in thanks to his wife that had just given birth to his son, he vividly remembered the expression on her face. It was a funny one, even if he would never say that out loud. He remembered that it seemed to ask, "Who is this person?" Of course, his wife had thought that this was just a temporary change caused by learning that he had an heir. However, Raven continued changing after this, and it made his wife wonder if there was something wrong with him. In the end, when his wife considered her husband before and after his change, she came to the conclusion that she preferred the new Raven, and her attitude shifted as well. The two of them were, at long last, a normal married couple. Raven reached down and lifted up his son, who was trying to scale his kneecap. The boy gurgled in delight as he was placed on Raven's thigh. He could feel the heat of his body through his clothes, and the familiar weight felt comfortable. A warm, steady satisfaction filled his chest. Now, Raven had only one objective. "I want to leave a well-kept domain to my son." Quote, it was a goal that any noble father would have. Raven looked warmly to the boy on his leg, and spoke to him. "What's the matter, Chu? Tan? Chuchu?" Only two people in the world would ever see a great noble puckering his lips and going, "Chu?" One of them, the boy, gurgled in delight. "Darling, baby talking him will spoil his grammar. HMPH. Nonsense, that's nothing more than a baseless rumor." That said, Raven reflected that it would be bad if he raised his son poorly. Since he was his son, that meant that he must have some measure of talent. Or rather, it was fine even if he was not talented, but as his parents, they had an obligation to discover or cultivate their child's abilities. As such, it would be bad if they negatively influenced him. Even so, he refused to give up the loving nicknames for him. Love was the best teacher, after all. Isn't that right, Tan? What's the matter? Do you want to tell Pa something? Raven ignored his wife's perturbed expression and asked again. Well, he looked like he wanted to share a secret of some sort, judging from the way he covered his mouth with his little hands. As he saw that movement, Raven's heart melted, the corners of his eyes drooped, and he made a face one would never expect of the man who had been referred to as a snake. "Well, what is it? Can you tell Pan?" What is it? Tonight's dinner. It's Pa's favorite. Pan will be very happy. What's for dinner tonight? It's Gabra fish a la Munier. Is that so? What's wrong? Tan. Raven saw the unhappy expression on his son's face and frantically followed up with a question. "I wanted to say it." Lightning seemed to flash behind Raven's back. "Is that true? Is that true? Well, then it's Pan's fault. Please forgive me. Tan, do you want to tell me anything?" As Raven looked at her with furrowed brows, his wife, not knowing what to do, covered her face. Tan, why don't you tell Pan? With an HMPH of annoyance, the boy jerked his head aside. Raven looked like he had just experienced a tremendous shock, so despondent that he wanted to die. "I'm really sorry, Tan. Pan is a moron and forgot everything, therefore, could you tell me?" His son glanced at him from the corner of his eye. It would seem he was almost there. "Not telling Pan. Pan's going to cry. Well, it's Pa's favorite fish." "Really now? Pa is so happy to hear that." Raven could not help kissing his son's pink cheeks over and over. It tickled, and so the boy laughed innocently. "All right, then let's go have dinner. I don't think it's ready yet." Really now? It felt like a basin of cold water had been dumped over his head, and an annoyed expression spread over Raven's face. It would have been an easy matter to order the chefs to hurry up, but they still need to follow the appropriate steps to do their work, and those steps had to be executed with specific timing. Thus, if he selfishly disrupted their routine, the food would not be as good as it could be. This was why Raven did not give those orders, even if he was not happy about the wait. It was also because he wanted his son to have the best meal possible. "All right, your father is in the middle of work. Let's go." Raven could not hide his loneliness he felt as he heard his son's lively reply. Wait, actually, I'm done with work." "Really? Umu, I really am done with work." "Is that so? Are you just planning to put it off until tomorrow?" Even if his wife was rolling her eyes at him, Raven would not let his son down from his knee. He clutched the boy tightly, and sighed as he felt the heat from his son's hot body flow into him. "Well, I was already at a dead end anyway," he muttered. "Not like I could finish it in a day." This was not an excuse. The fact was that he did not have anything urgent to take care of. His wife seemed to realize this and nodded several times. "I understand, but still, it seems really troublesome." "That's what I said. I don't need more arms or legs to do my work, just good heads. How about my brother? He's talented, but given that running your family's estate is taxing enough as it is, I don't think I could throw more work at him. Do you know anyone else who can be trusted?" Raven had already asked this question several times, and his wife had given him the same answer. "There's no noble who can work on the same level as you." The truth was that if someone else was like that, his life would not have been as difficult as it was now. In the end, all that he could do was to look among the commoners. If this was a place like the Empire, where there was a national system of education that trained people up for public service, it would have been fine, but in the kingdom, looking for hidden talents was like finding a needle in a haystack. All he could do was listen to rumors of talented people and recruit them. As he thought of how much time and effort this would need, Raven's heart sank. At this moment, his son had a good idea and spoke up. "Pan, I want to help you to work too." Tan, thank you very much. I loved you most of all." Raven did not stop kissing his son as he continued his baby talk. This was without doubt the happiest moment of his life. He could forget the stress of his daily life and achieve a small measure of peace. "Even if I have to sacrifice myself, I will protect all of this," Raven vowed in his heart.